After we eloped, my husband's parents cut him off and declared, "You either leave her, or you lose everything." My husband turned to me and said, "We have no choice." I smirked and said, "Actually, we have plenty of choices." Their smug faces vanished when they realized who had more power than they thought. I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in an all-out war with my in-laws, but here we are. My husband, Nate, and I eloped. We had been together for 4 years, and his parents tolerated me at best. Barely. Nate came from old money in Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of wealth where last names mattered, private clubs had waiting lists generations long, and everyone married within their class. It wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. I, on the other hand, was from a middle-class background in Atlanta. My parents were teachers, I worked in tech, and I didn't have a single distant relative with a street named after them. That was already strike one in their book. Strike two? I wasn't some quiet, agreeable, country club wife in training. I had opinions. I had a career. And worst of all, Nate actually listened to me. When we got engaged, his parents were cold about it. No excitement. No happiness. Just polite, strained smiles. I knew they didn't approve, but Nate didn't care. We started planning a small, intimate wedding, just close friends and family. Nothing extravagant. That's when everything went to hell. A week after we announced our wedding plans, Nate's parents called him in for a serious talk. I wasn't invited. That was my first red flag. He came home quiet, tense. I asked him what was wrong. "They said if I marry you," he said, rubbing his temples, "they'll cut me off." I laughed at first. They wouldn't. But his face told me otherwise. "They would," he said. "They will." I blinked. "They're serious?" "They gave me 2 choices," he said, voice hollow. "I either call off the wedding or I lose everything." I stared at him. "And what did you say?" He looked at me, helpless. "We don't have a choice." That's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't surprised that his parents tried to manipulate him. I was surprised that they thought they actually had that kind of power over us. They assumed Nate needed their money. They assumed I was some gold digger who would walk away if the bank account dried up. They assumed he was weak. They assumed a lot of things. They were wrong. I smirked. "Actually," I said, leaning forward, "we have plenty of choices." Here's what his parents never bothered to learn. 1. Nate had his own career. His parents loved to act like their wealth was the only thing keeping him afloat, but he had a great job in tech, one that paid more than enough for us to live comfortably. I had been helping him move his investments into separate accounts, too, just in case. 2. I wasn't after their money. I made my own. I had savings. I didn't need or want their inheritance, their trust funds, or their connections. 3. We didn't owe them anything. The way they talked, you'd think they built Nate from scratch. But he had worked hard, built his own skills, and their money had little to do with his actual success. 4. I wasn't the weak link. They thought they could scare me off. They thought the threat of losing money would send me running. I wasn't going anywhere. The next time we saw them, Nate told them our decision. "We're still getting married." His mother, Margaret, stiffened. His father, Richard, scoffed. "Then you're out," Richard said. Just like that. No emotion. No hesitation. Nate nodded. "Okay." Silence. Margaret blinked, her mouth tightening. Richard narrowed his eyes. "That's it?" "Okay." "Yes," Nate said, standing taller. "That's it." Margaret's jaw clenched. "You don't understand. If you go through with this, you'll lose everything." I almost laughed. "We understand perfectly," I said. "Do you?" She frowned. Richard leaned forward, arms crossed. "Where will you even go?" I pulled out my phone, scrolled for a second, then turned the screen to face them. 2 one-way tickets to Italy. Their faces fell. "We're leaving next week," I said cheerfully. Margaret's hand clenched on the armrest of her chair. "You're making a mistake." I smiled. "Or maybe you are." For the first time in their entire lives, they had no control. And they hated it. We left. Nate and I packed our things, subleased our apartment, and boarded a plane to Italy. Just like that, we were gone. For the first few months, it was bliss. We rented a small but beautiful place in Milan, spent our days exploring the city, eating pasta in tiny cafes, and reminding ourselves that we were free. No more cold, passive-aggressive phone calls. No more expectations. No more feeling like we had to prove ourselves to people who would never accept me anyway. But peace never lasts when people like them are involved. One evening, after months of silence, Nate's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then showed it to me. "Margaret." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to answer that?" He hesitated, then sighed and pressed decline. Less than a minute later, a text came through. "You need to call me. It's urgent." Nate ignored it. Then another. "This isn't a joke. There's a situation with the company." Still nothing. Then one more. If you don't call us back, we will be forced to take legal action. Legal action? Legal action? Now that got our attention. Nate frowned and finally called them back. I put the phone on speaker. Margaret picked up instantly. Nathan. He was quiet for a second. Mom. She exhaled, relieved. Thank God. What do you want? She hesitated. Then Richard's voice came through, cold and clipped. We need you to come back. Now. We exchanged a look. Why? Nate asked. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Margaret, voice tight, admitted, the company is in trouble. Apparently, things had gone downhill fast after Nate left. Richard, who had spent his entire life owning a business, but never actually running one, quickly found himself in over his head. Without Nate there to manage things, their outdated business model started crumbling. Investors were getting nervous. Their biggest clients were pulling out. And worst of all, there was a fraud investigation. Somehow, between the fancy dinners and backroom deals, Richard had gotten sloppy. The company's finances were being audited, and things were not adding up. If they didn't fix it fast, they could lose everything. And now, after disowning their son, they were calling him to clean up their mess. Nate sat back, rubbing his jaw. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. You tried to control my life. You cut me off. You threatened me. And now that you need something, I'm suddenly good enough to call? Richard had the audacity to sound offended. It's not about that, Nathan. This is family business. Family business? I cut in. You mean the same family that told us we were out? Margaret ignored me. We made a mistake, she said carefully. And now we need you. Nate's fingers drummed against the table. And what do I get out of this? There was silence. Finally, Richard exhaled. You get your place back. I almost choked. He wasn't offering money. He wasn't offering an apology. He was offering a chance to come crawling back, to be their obedient son again. I looked at Nate, expecting him to laugh in their faces. But instead, I saw something flicker across his expression, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Anger. Not frustration. Not disappointment. Deep, burning anger. He turned off the speaker, pressed the phone to his ear, and said, I'll think about it. Then he hung up. I stared at him. You're not actually considering it. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he got up, paced the small apartment, hands on his hips. Finally, he said, I want to see how bad it really is. I frowned. Why? Because if they're desperate enough to ask for my help, he said, that means they're desperate. I crossed my arms. And what? You're gonna go back and save them? He shook his head. No, he said, his voice calm. Too calm. I'm going back to destroy them. 2 weeks later, we were back in Charleston. We didn't tell Richard and Margaret we were coming. Nate wanted the upper hand, and showing up unannounced gave us exactly that. When we pulled up to their estate, things already felt different. The house was still massive, still looked like something straight out of Southern living, but it wasn't the same. The perfectly manicured lawn had weeds creeping through the flower beds. A few of the upstairs windows were dark, as if the family had shut down parts of the house to save money. We stepped inside without knocking. The butler, yes, they still had one, looked startled to see us, but said nothing. Margaret came rushing in from the parlor. She froze mid-step, pressing a hand to her chest. Nathan, she breathed, like she had summoned him with sheer willpower. Then her eyes flickered to me, and her face twitched. Oh, she said, much less warmly. And you. Nice to see you too, I said flatly. Richard strode in from his office, eyes sharp as ever, but there was something else in them this time, something unfamiliar. Worry. They weren't in control anymore. And they knew it. Nate gave them a long, assessing look. So, he said, tilting his head, tell me how bad it really is. Richard tried to make it sound less disastrous than it was. The investigation is a nuisance, he said, waving a hand like it was nothing. Some paperwork discrepancies. Easily fixable. Nate raised an eyebrow. Discrepancies? Or fraud? Margaret sucked in a sharp breath. Nathan, don't use that word. Fraud? I repeated, just to piss her off. Margaret's eye twitched. Richard's jaw clenched. It's complicated, he admitted. But if we fix it now, we can recover. Nate folded his arms. What exactly do you need me to do? Talk to the board, Richard said. Convince them to stay. Assure them the company is stable. We need you to be the face of this. Investors trust you. They always have. I almost laughed. They didn't just need Nate to help, they needed him to be their puppet. To stand in front of everyone and clean up their mess while they hid in the background. Wow, I said. So you spent years treating him like he was nothing, and now you want him to be the savior? Richard gave me a cold glare. This is family business. That's funny, I said. I could have sworn you told us we weren't family anymore. Margaret stiffened. Nate exhaled. I'll think about it. Richard's lips thinned. He didn't like that. He was used to giving orders, and he expected people to follow them. Well, Margaret said quickly, forcing a smile, while you think you should stay here. We'll prepare your old room. And we have a hotel, Nate interrupted. Margaret's smile dropped. Richard's eyes darkened. They expected us to come crawling back. They thought this was our chance to beg for their forgiveness, to move back into their world like nothing had happened. They were wrong. Later that night, Nate pulled out a file he had gotten from an inside source, a former employee who hated Richard and was more than happy to share company secrets. When Nate flipped through the pages, his face turned stony. What is it? I asked. They're worse off than they said, he murmured. They took out massive loans to cover losses. And they used the estate as collateral. I blinked. Wait, you mean if they don't fix this, Nate said, they're going to lose the house. My mouth fell open. Richard and Margaret had spent decades treating that estate like a symbol of their superiority. The grand parties, the charity events, the lavish dinners, they had built their entire reputation around that house. And now it was at risk. So if the company collapses, I started. They lose everything, Nate finished. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Nate turned to me, his jaw set. I'm not saving them, he said. I smirked. I know. Because now? We had leverage. And we were going to use it. The next morning, Nate and I arrived at the company's board meeting uninvited. We had done our homework. We had every financial record, every questionable deal, and every shady contract printed and highlighted. Nate had spent half the night making phone calls to old colleagues and board members. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one knew just how deep it went. Until now. When we walked in, Richard and Margaret were already seated at the long mahogany conference table, surrounded by the company's most powerful executives. Margaret's eyes widened. What are you doing here? Nate ignored her and took a seat at the head of the table. Richard stiffened. Nathan, this is a private. Nate cut him off. I have something to say. The board members looked between them, sensing the tension. Then Nate dropped the stack of files onto the table with a loud thud. Silence. I know everything, he said. Margaret's hand twitched against the table. Richard's face darkened. I know about the offshore accounts, Nate continued. The falsified reports. The loans you took out under the company's name. The ones you can't pay back. The room was deadly quiet. A few of the executives started flipping through the papers. One of them, a man who had been on the board for years, looked up, pale. Richard, is this true? Richard's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. This is taken out of context. Oh, it's perfectly in context, Nate said. You've been covering losses for years. You've been lying to the board. And now, the house of cards is about to collapse. A murmur spread across the table. Margaret turned to Nate, voice low and pleading. Nathan, please, Nate didn't even look at her. I came back to see how bad it was, he said. And now I know. But I'm not here to save you. I'm here to watch it burn. Richard snapped. He shot up from his chair, slamming his fist against the table. You ungrateful little shit, he snarled. After everything we've done for you, you mean after everything you've done to me? Nate shot back. Margaret grabbed Richard's arm, panic in her eyes. Stop, she whispered. This isn't the time. But it was too late. Richard turned back to the board, desperate now. You can't listen to him. He's been gone. He doesn't know what he's talking about. One of the older board members, a woman with sharp eyes, exhaled and tossed the papers onto the table. It's over, Richard, she said. Richard's face paled. Another board member cleared his throat. We need to call an emergency vote. Effective immediately. I saw the realization hit Margaret first. She turned to her husband, eyes wide. They're voting you out. Richard's hands trembled. No, he whispered. But one by one, the board members raised their hands. Richard and Margaret were done. Security escorted them out of the building. Margaret was silent, her face blank. Richard was shaking with fury. When we stepped outside, he rounded on Nate. You think you won? He spat. You think you've proven something? Nate stared at him. I didn't need to prove anything. Margaret swallowed. Nathan, for the first time, her voice wasn't cold. It was small. We're your parents. Nate's expression didn't change. Not anymore. She flinched like he had slapped her. Richard let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. You'll regret this. One day you'll need us. Nate turned, took my hand, and walked away. We never looked back. A month later, the estate was foreclosed. Richard and Margaret tried to fight it, tried to salvage something, but there was nothing left to salvage. We didn't see them leave. But we did see the for sale sign go up in their front yard. And then, a few weeks later, we bought the house. Because some legacies? They belong to the ones who earn them.